was also at ChefConf. How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good deal. Glad to have you. So you've already introduced yourself on previous shows, Martin, but why don't you give the audience a bit of background on you, what you do here at Rackspace, and what brought you to ChefConf?
Sure. So I'm a 3-year racker, and when I started, I worked on the DevOps automation service at Rackspace, which actually had a lot of chef in it, a lot of chef automation for customers and contributing back upstream. And since then, I've gotten even more involved in the chef community, and now I'm working on our Fanatical AWS teams, and I'm still using Chef from time to time and contributing back. And the ChefConf is one of my favorite conferences to go to, partly because there's an unconference session at the beginning, and I really like the open source and the community, so I was excited to go again this year.
Very cool. Nick, how about you give us a quick bio on what you do here for Rackspace and what compelled you to go to ChefConf?
Sure. So I've been a racker for about 3 years now. I started with the company as a systems engineer within cloud product. So a lot of the public cloud APIs and services that customers are used to. Worked on a couple of teams there. I worked on cloud identity for a bit, which was a very, very interesting time in terms of challenge at scale, right? I mean, identity for all of Rackspace Cloud was good times. I also worked on the cloud DNS team, working as an engineer supporting the V2 API of that, which is going to be backed by OpenStack Designate, which is an upstream open source project. And I recently transitioned into a new role, actually hot off the press, leading a team of engineers. So it's going to be pretty fun, sort of driving technical direction for how we develop and run products at scale within Rackspace. So as far as why I went to ChefConf, been using Chef for quite a long time. A handful of products within Rackspace do. I've never actually been to ChefConf, so I was really jazzed that they announced it was going to be here in Austin. I'd always admired from afar, so it was pretty awesome to be able to go. And just a plus one, sort of what Martin said about the open space, totally worth it, totally phenomenal. Being able to get together with people who are running Chef in a bunch of different ways at a bunch of different scales to talk about what works and what doesn't is awesome.
Well, cool. Both of you mentioned having used Chef for quite some time. Let's rewind a little bit since we're on the topic of ChefConf. What brought you guys to Chef specifically? What was your introduction and how did you begin using it?
Well, in my case, I used CF Engine before that, before coming to Rackspace, and I had dabbled in Puppet before that as well, before coming to Rackspace. And really, at Rackspace, us launching the DevOps automation service was what kind of threw me headfirst into Chef. And I really enjoyed working with customers to try to automate their environments, do configuration management with Chef. But what was really, really cool about that was being able to fix something for a customer and then send it upstream open source and contribute it back to the community. And that really got me jazzed. In fact, a lot of those contributions I did for customers, I discovered later used by other places at Rackspace, other products, other places out there. Just really got into the community aspect of it after starting with it at Rackspace.
The exponential power of open community so that you can solve a problem once and then everyone else who has that same problem doesn't have to make the same uphill slog that you made to solve it is really helpful because not only do you get to be part of solving that problem, but you've got all those other people who are making some other uphill slog that may have solved a problem you didn't have to run into yourself. And then you get to bake that into your approach, which is fantastic.
It's really cool to see when you submit something to an open source community and then someone comes back with questions and you realize that they're in a Fortune 100 company and their example they're giving you is some real world problem at scale. And you think like, well, if I hadn't happened to notice their example had these particular names in it, I wouldn't know where my stuff's being used. But it's really cool when it comes back and you see that it's used on ships and in distribution centers for products and all kinds of places you just never thought, helicopters, that all of those have happened to me with Chef. So it's really cool.
Seeing the real world application being useful to humans doing things.
Yeah. That's really gets me excited when I see those questions come in and they're from those kinds of places.
Well, cool. Nick, how about you tell us a little bit about what brought you to Chef and kind of where it's taken you?
Yeah, sure. So I actually did not know this until this call that Martin had background in CF Engine, which is awesome. So I too came from that world. CF Engine was really, really good at doing a thing, but as far as extensibility and being able to have this stuff work really well in a more dynamic environment, like a cloud environment where people are bursting or deploying ephemeral environments or whatever, CF Engine is kind of hard to use there. So surveying the landscape at the time, there's basically two choices back then. It was Puppet and Chef. So Chef is sort of proven to be one of the sort of best of breed tools for declarative configuration management. As an operator of any system, state is important, and so being able to assure that state comports with what you intend it to be is part of your critical path. So Chef's always been sort of good at that. It's also, as I've followed it, it's gotten really, really good at sort of bringing test methodologies and stuff you might do within software development to that ecosystem, right? To sort of treat this code that's effectively assuring state on your fleet. You have a way to sort of do rapid prototyping and have some test assurance that things are going to behave the way that you intend them to. So,
Which is a huge deal. I'm always protesting.
I feel like Chef's a really good iteration, and the tools that came before it, kind of like Nick said, all of that stuff that we didn't have in a world that was CF Engine, Chef, and Puppet, and now even some newer generations of tools really give you, and it's a great community and a great tool to evolve on from CF Engine.
Well, cool. It's cool to see a shared background, and there seem to be not infinite paths. There seem to be a few paths that tend in the same direction. So it's good to see that in place here. So talking about the conference itself, we usually see features launched and the progress made really highlighted at a conference. You see people who've solved specific difficult problems or in unique and surprising ways, I guess. So with this conference, what was it you were looking forward to going in? Maybe on Monday morning as things were beginning to kick up some steam, what was it you were most excited about?
I think I've said this already, but for me, the open space aspect of it is one of the things I really like about it. I mean, I was curious to see what Chef would announce at the conference because they have a history of doing that. But for me, it's just the going in, hearing what people's problems are, and then kind of building sessions around those on the fly is one of my favorite parts. And in fact, after going to a few ChefConfs, I think that I would almost rather go to more of that kind of thing. And they have that off cycle from the conferences, and I'm going to try to go to more of them. But that was what I was looking forward to, is those conversations with real people doing real work that have real problems.
All right, Nick?
Yeah, just building on top of the community summit aspect, I'm not certain if those who are watching or listening are familiar with the unconference format, but sort of the elevator pitch here is that it's really whoever's in the room, community curated like agenda of what you intend to talk about. So people will put together pitches for, I really want to talk about key management in Chef. It's a problem I haven't solved or whatever. So you talk about it, and basically the room votes, right? And the stuff that bubbles to the top tends to sort of get a space to go talk about that thing. And so, and if you're in that session and you aren't getting anything out of it, you're free to get up and walk on to the next session. Like there's zero shame in that game. So it's actually a really, really awesome format to get together with other practitioners from all over who are trying to do what you're trying to do, and to hear from them what works and what doesn't. So
it gives a real-time opportunity for collaboration with a broad group of experts that have a broad group of experiences.
Indeed,
sounds like a useful way to go about it.
The other great thing is you can propose a session. So maybe you have a problem and you say, does anyone else have this problem? And there's been times on those community summits where I've done one of those, and other times where I just listen and hear what kind of problems people encounter. But it's a really good place to get really high quality advice too if you have a problem.
The really rad thing about that too, to just bring it full circle, is after you've conquered something or you think you know the right way to do a thing, it's really, really powerful and feels really good to be able to connect with somebody who's trying to scratch an itch that you've already scratched. So being able to share that information or share that expertise, that feels really good. And that's another awesome component of the community stuff, because it's not just take, there's a lot of give there too. So
that seems like, to bring this more to the Rackspace side of things, that seems like one of the common threads that we have in hiring is finding people who are interested in finding ways to solve problems and then delivering that to larger groups of people, be that through building products that do that or through helping customers that find themselves in a specific situation that we've already addressed and can bring that expertise and experience to. So I know this is a quorum of 3, so it's not anywhere close to the 6,000 plus rackers that work for the company, but I think it is a common thread that you'll see as you work beyond the group that's here with your Rackspace support team or sales team, or people who want to bring that experience to bear. And it plays out when we're out in the community working with other technologies. So that's a bit of an aside, but we talked about what you're excited about going in. Let's pivot now that you've been to the 3 days of the conference. What did you actually find? Were there any surprising takeaways that maybe weren't in that original list of things you were looking for that you ended up finding?
I think in my case, I was really curious to see what they would do as a company with a set of products, having announced one pretty recently before the conference called Habitat, which we can talk about at length in a bit. But I was really curious to see what then would they release at the conference or announce, given that it's so common for tech companies to launch something big at a conference. And I thought, well, they've launched something big right before. What would they launch at the conference?
What else are they holding on to?
Yeah, exactly. And they actually did announce another tool, another product of theirs called Automate, which is something that wraps a lot of the other tools that they've built or put out into the community. And so that was really cool to see them sort of deliver on 2 fronts in a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. That to me shows that the Chef community is growing and more people are using Chef, and the fact that they can have enough development teams to deliver on all of those things at once was really cool.
Yeah, it's clear that the product story is really coming together, because I mean, like I said, Chef's really good at like declarative state management on hosts, right? But as our world is evolving with just containerization and all this other stuff, right? Chef's put together a couple of different products around like compliance, delivery, but they didn't really this is just my opinion, they didn't really kind of make sense. The story wasn't complete, and I think with Habitat and Automate, like it's all starting to come together in terms of being a real valuable and sellable thing, which I think is awesome, because it's going to enable somebody who wants to get something done move really quickly and really safely, which is why we're here, right?
Right. Yeah. With any product or technology, there's always a best use, and then there's always the other things that people try to use it to do. And as a product becomes more mature, oftentimes it's as a result of looking at what you do well and what customers need you to do well that you're not doing well, and then iterating in that direction and bringing together the right set of features and the right approach to deliver what's valuable to your customers. And while there are a lot of technologies out there that can deliver on automation, it seems that from a maturity standpoint and from being able to fit the needs of large enterprise organizations, Chef seems to be leading the way. It seems to be the most forward-thinking, like compliance being one of those big kind of scary monsters that people look at when they're looking at public clouds and containers and these new technologies. How does that fit into my the promises that I've made to my customers that I'll be compliant in these ways, and the promises I've made to my vendors that I'll treat their data in these ways? That's a really huge consideration. So it's interesting to hear the pace at which they're making progress in the direction of delivering to those gaps that were apparent and that are being addressed. Well, let's get into some of those new announcements and kind of what it means now that we have these tools.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was really neat about the conference is last year they announced something called Chef Delivery, which I think now they're calling Workflow, but kind of a CI/CD pipeline. And so it wasn't available when the conference happened last year. And so this year, with their Automate announcement and their very recent, before the conference announcement with Habitat, they had all of these things ready to go and demo on stage. So that was really neat to see the Automate tool basically be a single pane of glass for, as you mentioned, compliance, for CI/CD, looking at what systems are checking in with Chef Server. I mean, like Nick said, really kind of putting a really nice wrapper on all of these different tools. And you can see how, as chefs always said, they're looking for the advice for that they give to companies in consulting engagements, and when they help design solutions, they always say, like, what's right for you is what's right for you. It might be different for someone else, and you can see how they maybe had some gaps before when helping companies sort of build infrastructure where there was a piece that just didn't exist out there. And it's cool to see stuff like Habitat or even Automate fill some of those needs. So it's cool to see them basically taking the needs of real people building real products out there and then releasing their products to kind of fill those niches. So I thought that was a really great demo, and to be able to download it, talk about it at the conference, run it, was really great.
Yeah, the that aspect of it's you can do the failure to be prescriptive, right? I know for a while Chef was both lauded and lambasted for like not having a real prescriptive way to do things. And so if you're a Fortune 500 company who's trying to onboard this tech and there's not a clear path forward for you to do the thing, you have the potential to flounder a lot, right? Or take wrong turns and stuff. And so from what I've heard talking to colleagues at Chef is that these enterprises wanted things to sort of be more wrapped up in a bow, be more prescriptive, like help, you know how to go down this journey, help show me the way and provide me some clear direction and stuff. And so it's really awesome to see it all come together, and it's not just a bunch of pieces where you can mix and remix and all that sort of type of stuff in terms of how you define your workflow, that it's now there's a golden path, right? So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, clarity and direction in a time to market world like we have is huge, because you see so many projects. I don't work with Chef on a daily basis. I work with our enterprise cloud customers, and I see so many situations where a lot of time and effort is spent going a direction that is intended to get them to a goal, and they look up and say, I'm not pointed at that goal anymore. I have to backtrack and then reorient and then move forward towards where I need to be. And there's not much more frustrating than being in a situation like that for any of the people involved, saying, I already spent X number of weeks and months trying to make this progress, and all of that was for naught, because I found out after I got halfway there that there wasn't where we had originally prescribed. And so I have to go back and do rework, and I have to go back and reapply those lessons learned, where a company like Chef can say, we've worked with so many people, we've seen so many situations where it's worked right doing it this way, and it's worked poorly trying these other options. So we're going to consolidate all of that and allow people trying to adopt this originally not to make those same mistakes. Rework is painful.
Mm-hmm. And it felt good to see, a couple conferences ago, and when I didn't go to the first one, but I think it was like the second one, but it felt really good to see this year sort of what was happening at the conference, given that I remember at one of those first ones, one of the presentations, one of the main keynotes made a statement about okay, Chef is adopted by these sort of operations right now, and everyone, it wasn't sort of at the enterprise yet, and someone on stage made the comment that if we're successful, that's where it does go, that's where it gets adopted. Like these are good problems. If you have these problems, it means people are using your software. And it was cool this year to see sort of so many sessions on Windows, which has a bigger footprint, I think, in the enterprise in my experience. And then you also see things like Chef DK tooling to get new developers up to speed and things like that. So it's really sort of highlighting that point from a few years ago that it has arrived in all of these places that are bigger, where they don't want to learn those lessons over and over, where Chef can sort of say, we've seen these before, here's the right path, and a bigger organization is executing on those. And there were lots of those at the conference this year.
So I'm getting a sense that a lot of the themes are around pivoting from growth to maturity for Chef. There's still opportunities for growth, but it seems like a lot of the things that are being added are maturing components as opposed to like brand new, broad tool sets.
I would say that's fair. I don't know what Nick would say, but I think that for me, it's clear in the past year too, they've been talking about versioning a lot in the developer community, things that are maturity things. So that conversation keeps happening, and so it seems like that's where it's going.
Yeah, certainly one of the themes or one of the killer features I think with Habitat is that it takes all of the work that was done behind what they refer to as like omnibus, where I'm going to take my dependencies and rather than use system dependencies, I'm going to vend them into my stack. It took that reproducible build story and like totally put it on steroids, right? So like all my artifacts, dependencies, transitive dependencies, I get real, verifiable, reproducible builds, which I think is part of maturing, right? You no longer chase head or whatever. What you end up doing is, as an enterprise, you want to ensure that you're running version X within your stack and make sure that you can continue to run version X as long as the business says you need to run it, while you still crank out features for your app. That's really, really special sauce right there.
Yeah, your users demand consistency. They demand, I don't want you to take features away. I want you to be stable and available and consistent, and I want you to add features. And without a repeatable and clean way of getting there, you're going to frustrate the people who are depending on your app or your site or what you're building. And so I think those enterprise demands where you don't have the same forgiveness from a user base, probably more than anything are pushing those sorts of maturity directions and projects from a Chef standpoint.
Yeah, I know I had some conversations this year at the conference with developers that were even talking about adding back in support for older versions of Chef, which is interesting that it's mature enough now that there's a lot of versions out there, and you see like AWS, we work with OpsWorks on AWS as part of the Fanatical support for AWS offering, and you see that sort of chasing versions with Chef, but leaving older versions around, and a lot of enterprises have older versions. And they were actually I talked with a few developers about adding support back in for older versions and, trying to encourage people to get on the latest thing. But when you talk about something that needs to be super stable for sort of a large organization, it was interesting to see that conversation come up as much as the conversation about marching forward as was about not letting anything drop off the end.
Yeah, there's definitely a proclivity for the large organization, especially with enterprise requirements, to get really comfortable and know this we know is working. We've got reps making it work. Don't go pushing us to the next thing, which brings a whole different set of asks to the table for Chef. They need to be able to ensure security and consistency and all the other things, continuing with bug fixes and that kind of stuff on old versions, which is another, I guess it just goes back to that maturity conversation. People don't ask for that unless they're really happy with some of your older products. And you're doing something right if you have a few versions that people are still really loyal to.
And it's really neat that you see Chef both supporting that as well as contributing to things. I think we've talked about this before, but the State of DevOps report, where they're they have employees from Chef working on collecting data about how agile organizations are moving faster, driving more growth. And so they're on both sides of that conversation. They're on the stay stable and this is what enterprises need, as well as the contributing to the conversation about here's where the high growth businesses are, here's what they're doing, here's what's working for them, here's what correlates with that growth. So they're on both sides of that conversation, which feels really mature this year at ChefConf to see presentations about both of those.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think pace tends to be the conversation that we like to have on this show, being able to deliver quickly and be able to iterate quickly. But it's certainly not the only conversation out there. And so being forced to look at both sides, what were there any specific talks that that really caught your eye from that more stability focused enterprise side?
I thought one that caught my eye that maybe isn't exactly the question you're asking, but
It's totally fair.
I like the community aspect of Chef, and I went to one presentation talking about how to develop cookbooks, and in a lot of conferences sessions, you don't get a nice variety of skill levels in some of those sessions, and it was nice I went to this particular presentation by Tim Smith at Chef, and he had content in there for people that were brand new to Chef, which is the how to build new cookbooks and how to develop on Chef is such a conversation that has been happening for so long, and there's still all these new voices coming to it. So I think that, to me, that struck me as like, okay, there's a lot of people being onboarded into using this tool at enterprises. And at the same time, there was a lot of sort of fun content for people that have been building community cookbooks for a while, who were kind of nodding their heads in a sort of PTSD sort of, yes, I've been through that, I've learned that, but so many new people were there to learn it as well. So it's kind of another one of those both sides of that conversation were in one room at one presentation.
Yeah, there was there's a ton of really good sessions there. I didn't attend Tim's talk, but a couple of them really struck me. There was a conversation, like if you want to geek out about ops, there was a story by some of their systems folks talking about their migration from hosted Chef from one platform to another. So that was really, really interesting to hear about how you can undertake a migration to minimize customer disruption, right? That's something we all try to do, is to get from here to there with trying to put as little impact on the customer as possible. So that was a really interesting technical conversation. But even stepping away from the tech stuff, right? We talked about the state of the DevOps report. There's like a data scientist that works for Chef, and she works on their analytics platform. She shared so much statistical information in a talk that was wonderful, talking about sort of where our ecosystem is and trying to identify sort of traits or tenets that work and don't. I'm not a data scientist or statistician, so I was a little overwhelmed, but overall that was a wonderful, wonderful talk. And then probably another one that really struck a chord with me was there's an engineer from Facebook who tends to show up to ChefConf over and over again and giving talks, and he gave one that wasn't about how Facebook uses Chef, but was really about how to transform your operational culture with technology. So just talking about some strategies or tips that sort of work for allowing your company to move at velocity without making a bunch of sort of mistakes or missteps. So that was really rad.
And I would add as well, if any of those sound interesting to you, I believe they've already posted the keynotes for some of those for the 2 main days of the conference online, but I bet those are going to get posted, those additional sessions, pretty soon.
So it never fails to be at a conference and you look at the listing of all your options you can go learn about, and there's always the 2 best ones seem to always be booked right on top of each other, and you can't see them both. So what's the one talk that you guys each going to go track down as soon as it gets posted that you weren't able to see and participate in while you were there?
Actually, the data science one Nick mentioned, I did not make, and I'd love to go watch that, because that woman that wrote that talk is involved in the state of the DevOps report, and some of those statistics are so striking to me that I bet there was a lot of interesting content there.
I guess that was a bit of a softball, since Nick had already
that one I want to see
laid that
for
one
sure.
up on the silver platter. Nick, what did you miss that you'd like to check out?
I actually went and took a look at the schedule to make sure what sort of really stuck out at me. But there's not one particular talk, but there's a handful of themes around like how to do the chef in the enterprise, right? I don't work at a gigantic bank or a giant insurance company or whatever, and so those constraints aren't really known to me, and so those would be interesting to hear about, and just in terms of like how a team or how an organization tries to adopt a tool to provide value. That seems provocative to me and interesting to be able to understand and empathize with what it means to try to do what I do in a totally different environment.
They also had I think a whole track on habitat, and I believe they ended up giving their presentations 2 days in a row the same set of talks because they were so popular. And I think the second time they made sure they were recorded. So I want to go back and watch those. The tool's really too new for me to have played with it that much, but I would love to go learn about it and watch those as well.
Yeah, and they did it in a way that was
really.
They did it in a way that was really great too, where they sort of stepped it up. They called it like 101, 201, 301 or whatever. So if you want to hear about what it can do for you, here's a conversation in the 101 session. If you want to hear about how it was built or what it intends to do and a little more intermediate type topic, watch 201. If you want to talk to one of the core maintainers of it and dive real deep into the internals, watch the third one.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a decent series that you can consume at your own pace as well. So to have it set up that way is pretty valuable.
And they still have the recordings from last year and the year before that, and it goes back pretty far. I know the first one I went and watched the keynote from the year before. So my guess is they'll get those posted very quickly. But Nick alluded to this. There's a lot of operations people or people that have worked in an operations role that attend that conference. There's a lot of overlap with things like Monitorama. And a few other conferences about operations. So there's a lot of really good content about that in there too that you could watch.
Okay. So this is a bit to the side of this topic, but Nick, you mentioned a talk about companies adopting new technologies to allow them, organizations adopting new technologies to allow them to operate more quickly and efficiently and effectively. And I've had the opportunity to hear one of your talks on chat ops, and we actually had Martin on a show about chat ops. And those are examples of new technologies that allow an organization to operate in a new way that has some very specific benefits. And I know there are some ways to kind of marry automation tools and orchestration tools with these other operational add-ons that can really improve an organization's ability to deliver. With Chef specifically, what are some of those technologies that you find are best paired with Chef to deliver value? And then how is integrating those in a 101 type conversation? What are some of the best ways to begin integrating Chef with some of these other tools that are value accelerators?
I mean, certainly, so like I said, Chef sort of directs how a host or a node or whatever it is should behave, and that node tries to make it behave that way. Having telemetry or visibility into that, like, hey, when'd you last run? Hey, you failed. Why'd you fail? Whatever that means. So having visibility into that's really, really valuable, right? And if you're going to try to sort of own soup to nuts how to deliver an application out to your fleet and all the way in front of customer eyeballs. So being able to instrument that through chat's pretty valuable. So in order for us to talk to a Chef server, we tend to use a utility called Knife, which is a part of the core suite of Chef tooling, and so being able to instrument that in the open is really powerful stuff. So in the open, in terms of I can kick off an operation in my team's chat room, right, as opposed to running it on my terminal. There's a bunch of value there in terms of like visibility of who's working on a thing. It's inherently self-documenting and self-training in terms of the other team being able to understand how to do a thing, right? It's not written in a wiki somewhere, but it's in a channel that you can tune into, which is pretty awesome. And then being able to take the end of a Chef run and have visibility into that within chat. That's a pretty valuable thing. So there's a pretty good handler written by I believe it came out of the Instratius and that team. That's to what Martin was talking about, right? Being able to write something in Chef and contribute it open source. So there's a pretty good handler to emit Chef client runs into Slack, so your team can have visibility into successes and failures. Those are two pretty powerful things.
I learned about a company had 20,000 laptops they were managing with Chef, and they were doing a lot of integration with. In addition to they did some chat app stuff, but they also had a large search utility where they were indexing tons and tons of that data that Nick's talking about, and it seems like that's a common one I see integrated with Chef is some way to collect all of this stuff that's happening and go look at it, and that's probably one reason why Chef's analytics tools are so popular as well, is because you get so much data that people are often integrating that data with some tool to make sense of it.
Because that's usually what an org tends to do, right? When there's a 0-day vulnerability or some highly visible potential risk to your organization, hey, what version of OpenSSL are we running everywhere, or whatever that is, right? That's being able to have telemetry into that is a really valuable thing for an org, regardless of your size, to be able to have. There's a ton of gold in those Chef Hills in terms of what ran where, what's the state of things. Just going back to talking about the operations discussion that was had at ChefConf by the team who moved hosted Chef from one platform to the other, one of their biggest challenges was that reporting database, where of the 400,000 customer nodes and 100,000 organizations, they write their Chef client run, to this reporting database, and they keep a lot of them. And so we're talking about terabytes and terabytes of data that they undertook in terms of migration. So there's a lot of value in the business being able to see what's going on with your fleet in there.
From a fleet management standpoint, you're talking about some pretty big numbers and some heavy lifting when it comes to really knowing what's going on within a large environment. And we have a lot of customers who are maybe not on the enterprise level, but that are trying to use the best tools to help them grow. And if you're intending to grow and you've got all of this, all of these tools that they can be using, but going and finding out what version you're running on your handful of servers, it doesn't feel like that daunting of a task. This would be a great place to go in and set it up now, so that as you grow, you've got the right tools in place to handle that growth quickly and with very deft and intentional movements, so that you're not finding yourself down the road when some vulnerability comes out, scrambling and trying to put all that information together by hand, or building a tool to do it. So we've kind of camped a little bit on the enterprise-y side of things for a lot of this conversation, but it's certainly not. Chef is not a tool exclusively used in the enterprise, and for those that are in that CI/CD world that are talking about pace and they're talking about trying to inflect that growth to massive scale, putting these kinds of tools that we're talking about now in place early can have huge dividends. It may not be that difficult right now, but it's going to be very difficult down the road to sort your environment and find exactly what's where and how it's set up. So earlier is better when adopting these kinds of things, and finding ways to pair what you're doing now with some of the other technologies that are available, and some of these features that come out. I think the fact that Chef was able to put the tools that they just launched in the hands of people today at the conference is a big deal, because if you say, this thing is coming, we'll launch it here in a minute, you don't get to see what's intended from it there live, and you have to wait until the next big conference for people to present on progress that they're making. So Chef is able to put that stuff right in front of users immediately, and they can start getting that value and turning that back around. And that means that even the small companies who haven't hit that big inflection point can begin to consume it immediately and find where it fits best for their organization. And the earlier you're adopting these things, the more tools you'll have at your disposal when that unfortunate future shows up where you have to address something like vulnerability.
That hypothetical OpenSSL update that you might need to make.
That's never going to happen.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
All the bugs are fixed, never again.
It was really cool to see Habitat, the tool they had released maybe 15, 20 days before the conference. There were already people using in production that were at the conference. So you talk about getting it out there in front of people. It was already to the point where there were conversations about using it in production, even at the community summit, and problems and solutions were already flying around, even though it only been announced to most of the world for a couple weeks. So that I agree with you there. I know I've also seen, I work with customers of all different sizes, and we have people running Chef as an agent on a server. We have people that use Chef to build a golden image. We have people using Chef to build Docker containers. We have people using that technology in all kinds of ways. And so all of them have this shared tool set to look at things like, what version am I running? If you want to run an agent you weren't running before and you want to get some of that data back, for a lot of these customers, it's easy to switch from one of those models to the other, or even spin up a local machine using a tool like Vagrant and look at what Chef would do, even if you're not running Chef out in the cloud, and just be able to play with it and get a lot of flexibility out of all of those options.
That's a really, really key point there with, and not just getting started, but how you iterate or how you work. When you can make it really easy or really cheap to try a thing, start a thing, whatever that is, there's a really, really good user story within Chef in terms of like what it means for you to either start writing a recipe which goes into a cookbook, or to take an existing recipe in a cookbook and alter that to land the change you intend to do. There's a lot of tooling that's been done by Chef to sort of try to make that easy, but then the teams that I see that are really high performing also extend that tooling or make that experience. You're a new member of a team, right? How can you sort of go from 0 to 60 as fast as you can and actually contribute value? It's making that onboarding of what it means for you to instrument Chef really, really cheap and easy. That seems to be a pretty core tenet of high velocity teams.
I've definitely discovered, Nick's reminding me of something I discovered recently, which is that even aside from all of the things we've talked about with Chef, even the movement towards golden images and using tools like Packer, I ended up evaluating some tools to build golden images, and it turned out that aside from all of these other things related to Chef, the fact that it was in our arsenal meant that it was really easy to install some different pieces of software like Redis and Elasticsearch and things that were hard to install on certain cloud images, because Chef was sort of built around this model of being multi-platform, on being easy to bootstrap anywhere, things that I don't think anyone was thinking about when they were building it, but now I can use to build a golden image, even uninstall Chef afterwards. And that's like a whole other side benefit I had never predicted I would even use it for.
I think the longer people use tools, the more things show up. Like, oh, I didn't even notice that I found myself on this path until I'm here, and this is incredibly useful. Having the reps and the opportunity to try various things in various situations means that you build a repertoire of things that you wouldn't have expected a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but that come as second nature and is incredibly valuable. So practice.
It's true. It was definitely a surprise to me when I realized I already had a tool that worked across distros to install specific versions of software that I hadn't even thought about, that I would have had to bootstrap with a number of steps if I was not using Chef. Even some of the other configuration management tools, you talk about that enterprise maturity, even some of them are not quite at the point where you can walk into an unknown environment and install them without discovering a missing dependency or something like that, whereas Chef and that Omnibus project that Nick mentioned earlier made it so easy to use it in so many places that it gets used for all the right things, sometimes wrong things that it doesn't work that well for, but you see it everywhere, from big servers to Raspberry Pis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the omnibus pattern is a really, really powerful pattern. What I've noticed is that, and just the quick snippet there is this idea of like, I'm going to take all my runtime dependencies and I'm going to vendor them in a place so that if you upgrade a system library, you don't break the Chef tooling, right? So Chef bundles its own OpenSSL. As a consequence, Chef has to own patching its own OpenSSL, right? When there's a vulnerability that, has exploit potential. So, but going back to Omnibus, what I've seen is that it's such a good pattern, or a powerful pattern, that tools that essentially compete with Chef, there's community members who use those tools who are leveraging the Omnibus sort of build platform and build spec and build tooling. Chef DK is a tool that bootstraps the requirement development environment for you to start using Chef. And it's sort of like a one big installer. Competitors to Chef, their community members are building sort of the same thing. So what it means for me to get started in an instant with Ansible, right? There's some smart people in the Ansible community who've taken that pattern and implemented it, much to the value, right, of Ansible users, right? So they've made it easier to get started and go fast using Ansible. So yeah.
Well, that's one of the exciting things about being in an ecosystem that has a variety of approaches. You see somebody come across or get to a point where they have the best approach for a specific problem. And then the other people in that ecosystem can say, that is exactly what I want for my project. I just happen to be using another tool. Let's use that concept and extend that into our tool set. It happens with open source technologies. It happens kind of all over the place, but in this type of an automation ecosystem with a variety of people basically trying to do similar things, when a fantastic solution is come to, it's not kind of concealed and capsuled in this one space. It's everyone sees it and everyone can say, yeah, that's the right approach. We want to adopt those lessons learned that got you to that point. We want to adopt that direction and approach so that our tools can be as easy to use or can get us to that same place, but we don't have to completely pivot into another project.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Golang community and what Google's done with static linking of software so that it's easier to package and run everywhere. You see, and then also just in general with that community, you see approaches come up, people try them, really like one and go forward. So yeah, it's both the specific example and the general idea of sharing those solutions that you definitely see in a lot of other communities.
Yeah, we haven't actually come up for air in about 45 minutes. So I'm gonna take a quick minute to say anybody who is watching and has questions about how ChefConf went, specific things in that conversation or things that our conversation we've had so far has brought up, feel free to jump in on Twitter. We have CloudQA is our hashtag. Let us know if you got questions there or in YouTube comments. We'll be happy to answer any of those. But we're running up close to the end of our time. So I want to give you guys both an opportunity to kind of share what your key takeaway was or the thing that we haven't covered yet that was most exciting and compelling about the momentum and direction of Chef and its community after ChefConf wrapped up. So I know I kind of cut you off there, Nick, so I'll let you finish what you're going to say, and then let's go into that kind of wrap-up direction.
I was just going to say, like, yeah, talking about giving back to the community, it's that omnibus pattern that Chef, chose to sort of bundle it together in a way and give it away open source in a way that lets you consume it in a way that's not Chefy, right? So regardless of what your pattern is or whatever your platform is or your stack, like there's a method for you to onboard those lessons learned and really sort of stand on the shoulders of giants with that. So it's really powerful.
As far as lessons learned, things we haven't mentioned yet with ChefConf, I'll throw one out there that really I wasn't necessarily not expecting, but I was really pleased by was one of the big themes for the conference this year was something that I feel like has been growing in the chef community. They've had a code of conduct. They've talked about sort of always being friendly, always be helpful, kind of like your motto here at Rackspace about be helpful. But it was really cool this year to see so much of the conference really even focus on this. They had sort of this hashtag hug ops for it, right? But this idea that software and really the whole industry should be humane, and remember that this is all affecting humans and this is not in a vacuum, and like how important it was for both software and the entire process of building it and delivering it to be humane, and think about things like that maybe don't often come up in tech conferences. And I just love the chef community really focuses on that and makes it a big part of why you're here is those sorts of ideas, not just having it be you go and deliver your session and you don't know anybody, and you leave and don't talk to anyone. Everyone's giving everyone a hug, even people they don't know. So it's very it was a cool theme to see at that conference grow even further than I thought it could.
Yeah, I mean,
there's definitely conversations around like the culture required to effectively run a DevOps operation, and that happens within an organization who's trying to adopt a DevOps approach or who is running within a DevOps approach. But with the state of DevOps being something that Chef really champions, and the culture required, they need to be kind of leading the charge and setting the tone for what those cultural norms within a DevOps community ought to be. And if they can be that template within their organization, and then when they have conferences, share those lessons learned, that's pretty huge to have this petri dish of how do we do this excellently within their organization, and then extend that out. That's pretty cool. It's good to see them championing that.
Yeah, it's really easy to if you just think purely about technology and divorce yourself from the humanity behind it. It's real easy to get sort of wrapped up in that cycle of just trying to think purely systematically without any empathy for who it is you work with, who it is you're building something for, whatever. And when you think about like conferences in general, right? It's inherently like a sterile environment. You're in a cold ballroom, right? Or you're surrounded by strangers, and so it's phenomenal to see something that sort of started within the community be on stage at a keynote on a giant screen in terms of like really having some. We're all connected. We're all in this together, and being able to share. It sounds silly, but yeah, this share a hug like with somebody you either work with all the time, share a hug with somebody who's you don't work with, and so there were strangers hugging strangers, right? And this idea of like we're here, and there's a lot of stuff that gets overlooked in the technical community in terms of that empathy and that humaneness. So,
well, even having the unconference component and saying, bring your concerns, your problems, your questions to a group of people who are also willing to set the problems that they've got to the side and help you with yours, fosters that. So it's I'm glad that was the thing you were looking forward to most, is that unconference framework that they tend to use. But then I think even having that as a core component of the conference just extends and shows that the community aspect and the norms required to do DevOps well and to be involved in the chef community, they are behind them. They are pushing them forward, and they want people to come to their tooling open, friendly, and willing to help.
Mm-hmm. They kind of wrapped up the second day's keynote with this idea of this phrase, "I want to ship your idea," which is like a very puts the conversation and the tone of like someone who has an idea and I want to help you, not I want to make sure you don't your software doesn't have bugs, but like I want to ship your idea. Very personal, very humane, very sort of looking for help and offering help in return. I think they even were throwing around the word Ubuntu at one point. So maybe they took it a little too far, but it's the kind of conference where you could run into somebody on the street and think, oh, these conference goers are going to look out for each other. Like everyone actually cares about the community and each other, which is really cool.
Well, promoting those sorts of of community norms and encouraging people to interact and be friendly and be helpful is really going to pay dividends when it's embraced, because you're going to have those hallway conversations that happen between, oh, I was at your talk and I've seen it from this slightly different angle. Let me share with you my story. That's going to help the speaker the next time they give that presentation to flesh their idea out further and go back to their problem that they solved and solve it maybe a little bit better, or guard from that potential that they hadn't seen yet because of their requirements. It's going to help innovate and iterate on what customers are doing of Chef and users of Chef are doing, as well as provide innovation within Chef on how to move forward best and deliver the most value. So having that open community and that willingness to help from between users means that their support can extend into a group of people who are excited and willing to be a part of solving other people's problems. And in doing that, it's solving the Chef community's problems, not just that one other person, but that's being extended out to a larger group. And that's something that we at Rackspace get behind pretty heavily.
Yeah, everybody wins in those communities.
Just sort of building off of that real quick, like they hand out these community chef awards every year, and really sort of the tenets behind that is like how wonderful and helpful is this person. That seems to be a recurring theme as I watch people in the community win these awards. Everything about it is like how helpful they can be to you, regardless of whether you're like a random person who shows up in IRC who's trying to fix their chef, or you're an organization who's looking for transformation or whatever. So that's a clear theme with people who are sort of champions of community within Chef when they award the community chef awards at every summit.
Well, I think that those themes tying in with the Rackspace approach of be helpful, we've talked with our social teams on a couple of occasions, and that's really the credo, is find ways to be helpful. That's what we do here at this show. We try to put content that's useful to viewers in front of them and provide that for the long term so that you can find it later when you run into that specific question or concern. And that said, we're up to the end of our hour. So this is again Rackspace Cloud Office Hours. This is a weekly show. Usually it goes off at 1. We pushed it back to 1:15 so that we could accommodate our guests today. So thank you both for being available, Nick and Martin. Martin, it's great to have you in the studio.
It's a little surreal, but it's good to be here.
Well, we'll try to do this again sometime when
Sounds
you're around. But thank you both for joining and bringing your experience and the time you spent at the conference to the broader audience. And if you're watching this live, thanks for sticking with us for the hour. If you're watching this recorded, you can find our other shows, our other content. We've talked about many things in this show that we have full hour shows camping out on. So we've talked about Chef, we've talked about other config management tools, automation tools, chat ops, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can find that on the Rackspace YouTube page, and at live.rackspace.ohpodcast.com, I believe, is our other website, which is also the location of our audio-only podcast. So we'll be back next week with another show with more good content. So enjoy the rest of your Thursday or whatever day you find this in the future. Thank you very much, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.